Excellent. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I was so excited to have just solved the audio issue as best I can. It's nice. And until it breaks again. But, I will take these as they come. Now, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, it was the fist bump heard round the world.
What is that?
And reminiscent of the MBS fist bump. So Biden, the question was Biden going to shake hands with MBS after saying it was, during the campaign that we needed to make Saudi Arabia pariah and blaming him directly for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, which is reality. So, and yet at the same time dealing with the geopolitical necessity that Saudi Arabia plays on the world stage. Like, these are the balancing acts of a president. Now, if you'll recall, I don't know if you remember, but during the Trump presidency, apparently he could hang out with Vladimir Putin. He could praise Duterte for shooting drug dealers. And even most recently at one of his speeches in Las Vegas, he actually said it's about time we start doing that. That's how you get rid of your drug problems. Just start shooting for whatever reason. You just start shooting drug dealers. That's that in theory, right?
Judge Dredd style.
Yeah, sure. I am the law. And so the big question was he going to confront him about the Jamal Khashoggi killing? And obviously Fox News was aflutter with concern over Jamal Khashoggi all of a sudden. And
now they care?
Yeah, of course they do. And now that Biden's going to Saudi Arabia, and a couple of things are happening. Because you have to understand.
Why didn't they care when he died?
That is an excellent question. I'm going to go with they still don't, but it is politically and ratings-wise expedient for them to make people believe that they do. Sorry, and if there's a Twitch sound issue all of a sudden, that's very strong.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing.
But
I didn't want to interrupt you.
But YouTube is fine.
Yeah,
I think that's a Twitch thing then, guys. That's not something I control. I can only batten down so many hatches at once.
YouTube is good.
Okay, and I believe Facebook is all right as well. So the question was not only was Biden going to go there, and the question was basically where they were making the case that he's going there to beg them for oil. This was the issue. Biden's going to go there. He's going to shake hands with Jamal Khashoggi's killer. He's going to blow off every criticism he ever had about Saudi Arabia, and he's going to beg them for oil. This is the Fox News story. Now, keep in mind, when Trump met with Kim Jong-un in Vietnam, and they had and he says they wrote love letters to each other, and they fell in love, and they had snacks, and they shook hands, and they spent time together, and they had a lot in common, and all that. What did the United States actually get out of North Korea during that period? The short answer is nothing. They continued to make nukes. They just didn't fire the test rockets over the Sea of Japan. They just kept developing stuff, basically doing all the land work on it. And yet Biden has gone to Saudi Arabia. And before he arrived, Blinken and his team had been talking to Saudi Arabia, and they are now allowing flights from Israel to go over Saudi airspace and also land. You can fly directly from Israel to Saudi Arabia now. Now, if you'll recall, when the Abraham Accords happened, the Chicago, I'm hearing myself, sorry. When the Abraham Accords were done, the idea that you could fly directly from Israel to Bahrain or from Israel to the UAE all of a sudden, or fly over them, or they would normalize commercial traffic between these two countries, that was seen as a huge deal. Except it wasn't, because there was no direct conflict between the two of them. And it was, and in that particular instance, like the Saudis at that time were still to some degree had anti-Israel stuff in textbooks. The imams were still talking crap about Israel quite regularly. That has been dialed back in the last year and a half quite a bit, measurably so. And now, the same thing that, the Trump world and the maggots were crowing about Trump doing with Bahrain and UAE, Biden has successfully done with Saudi Arabia.
Chicago lost to unclean feed.
Oh, dear God. That's as you do.
As you do.
I was hearing them, and then they bounced back, and I'm restarting it. Hopefully that will fix it. I think this is just an interwebs problem, I'm hoping. But we shall see. Let's see. Let's see. Not sure why I wouldn't see any stuff on there. This is the show. Okay, so here we go. Let me try this, if I may. The check. Hold on. Okay, hopefully that will solve the issue. And Chicago will hear me again. Excellent.
MP says CPT is good.
Excellent. Welcome back. Sorry about the drop there. I'm not quite sure what was the root of all that, but we'll, piece by piece is what we do. Now, the Saudi Crown Prince, Prince Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud, as in of the House of Saud, and U.S. President Joe Biden attended the Jeddah Security and Development Summit. Saudi Arabia has announced that they are willing to boost their daily oil production capacity by 1 million barrels. And leadership says, though that does not necessarily mean more actual oil production, their production capacity, meaning it'll go through. And largely, it's about what leaves the country. That's the capacity part. They don't have to pump more oil. They just have to deliver more oil to the world market. They have incredible storage abilities because they want the ability to manipulate the markets. So one of the big untold stories of the UAE and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia is that along with these big gleaming cities we hear so much about, they also build these giant storage containers for oil so that if they ever get into a game of chicken with Russia or with other oil producing countries, they can shut it off without freezing up their wells. So that's been a project they've been engaged in since the late 70s. So they have the ability to just sit on a lot of oil as it continues to come out of the ground. So they don't have to raise their capacity that's coming out of the ground to increase the amount they put to market.
Sure.
The promise to boost daily production potential from 12 to 13 million barrels came from Crown Prince during a visit by Joe Biden. The Crown Prince noted that there's no more capacity to boost upwards beyond that because they don't have it. People, I'm here to tell you, the Saudis are on the edge of cash poor. It's one of the reasons why he's been drawing back a lot of the money and the like trinkets that the royal family members get, why they've all been put on a diet effectively, why they've been forced to sell foreign holdings, because oil is a scarce resource. If you can use it up, you can run out. And Saudi Arabia is, for the longest time, one of the reasons why its capacity looked so big is because its usable land was so small. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons why Russia is that way, or even Venezuela in a lot of ways, versus the United States or other places. It's because the land they are willing to sacrifice for oil production is way higher than a lot of other densely populated, highly arable land spots like Europe or the United States or Canada even. There are areas where it's basically unlivable. And so setting up an oil rig to get that stuff out of the ground is no big deal. Nobody's getting displaced. Nobody's losing any of their any of the groundwork that they desperately need. So I'm checking one thing too, just to make sure, because some of the folks are talking about audio on the other thing. Believe me, I'm looking. I'm trying to remedy this while I'm talking.
Doing an amazing job of talking and
I'll get it all down. So what I would like to say though is,
thank you, Joy Noel.
So much of what we see coming out of this trip is far beyond the expectations that people had for it. The majority of what we had heard about the trip to Saudi Arabia was that we wouldn't get anything out of it, and Biden was going to shake hands with this guy who had killed Jamal Khashoggi. Now, even Jamal Khashoggi's widow has come out in support of how Biden handled it. She released a statement, and I'll see if I can dig it up real quick. But the overall feeling of that she said was, because he said after the meeting that he had actually brought up the MBS's responsibility for Khashoggi's death, not just bringing it up like, hey, that thing about that thing that we don't talk about. Yeah, don't do that anymore. He directly brought up, he name dropped Khashoggi about this in particular, and that in and of itself is a nice step forward. It's also nice to know that he also said he brought up human rights and women's rights, particularly and LGBT rights in the state of Saudi Arabia, and also managed to get them to open their airspace and produce more oil. Like, this was, as far as one of these things go, one of the most positive steps forward that wasn't just Jared Kushner making billions of dollars that I've heard out of a trip from Saudi Arabia in quite a long time. And he didn't have to bend over and get a necklace over his head, and he didn't do a silly sword dance to try and fit in.
Did he touch the globe?
There was no globe touching. They did not, even there was some trotting going on, there was no globe fondling at any point during this process. So we should not be surprised at this point that you're not going to hear a lot more about this trip on the news over the next couple of weeks. It is going to pass into the memory hole because it was effective, it was reasonable, it was an effective use of diplomatic power, and it is going to solve the issue ahead of it, which is that million. We've already seen oil drop below $100 a barrel, and gas prices continue to go down. That extra million barrels of capacity per day is going to go, and this isn't the only country. They're talking to Bahrain and UAE. They're talking to Venezuela. They're talking to Mexico. They're doing it. We're doing it in the United States. Even Canada is stepping up. So the replacing of the 5 million barrels a day lost from Russian capacity is essentially going to be erased within the next 2 to 3 months. That will be right before the midterms, where the prices will be going down. Hopefully people will recognize that you can't be 100% responsible for the problems created in the world, but people can recognize you're working towards genuine solutions. We'll be back right after this. This is the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide. Welcome back to the show. So, the message from Jamal Khashoggi's widow was, I would like to thank President Biden for raising my husband Jamal Khashoggi's murder with the Crown Prince. He raised it first and foremost, and for that I am grateful. I would also like to thank President Biden for fulfilling Jamal's true legacy, which is to highlight the issue of human rights and political prisoners. This meeting was the beginning of accountability for my husband's murder. Through the American justice system, I, along with my legal team, intend to hold all parties accountable for the murder of my husband. That's pretty definitive. That's pretty direct, and a good sign, and kind of a surprising statement from her, but there it is. Now, one of the other stories coming out of that the trip in general, besides the fact that they are going to increase oil production, and that in and of itself will pretty much guarantee that oil would be heading maybe towards $80, $85 a barrel somewhere around October if all the increased efforts continue. Now, that does not handle the refining capacity issue that the United States is, and other countries are fighting across the board. While America showed 9.1% inflation in June, the making, I guess, bringing Joe Manchin back into the storyline of current politics, in a way by just, thrusting him through, and I'll explain why in a second. We also are one of the few countries, unlike, Europe, that's experiencing like 8.2% or 7.6% inflation, that we have wage growth that is compensatory to that inflation. A lot of these other countries are experiencing this inflation without wage growth at the same time. So imagine, it basically, imagine experiencing in the United States what would effectively be, instead of 9.1% inflation, closer to 16% inflation.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
Because there would be no money to make up for it. Now, we've been all over the BS money printing story a dozen times. And the general story, though, that I would like to tackle, and it's always difficult when you're trying to, deal with the Manchin cinema element in these things, because you end up wrestling with a lot of people, by the way, that are not by any means West Virginia or Arizona voters, but they are willing to punish Ron Wyden or even the Tim Ryan trying to get elected in Ohio. They're going to punish them for the votes that Manchin is stifling by being one of 48 elected Democrats. We have 2 independents that caucus with us, and we need Kamala Harris's vote to get over the 50 threshold for budgetary decisions.
Yeah, just for anything.
For anything. And the idea that somehow we have just, that we won, we have control of the government. That mythology is creating a lot of headaches in just the sort of Democratic electorate in general, because there's this illusion that we did it. We crossed that line and that's all we needed. We barely crossed that line. If we had lost one of the seats in Georgia, Mitch McConnell would be the majority leader in the Senate. And none of the things we're taking for granted right now, getting out of Afghanistan, the rescue package, the deficit being cut in half, unemployment being cut in half, the infrastructure bill, gun regulation, the Violence Against Women Act being re-upped, none of those things would have happened. And I don't mean they would have been dealt smaller and made less effective, because in many ways, because we only had that 50-50 split, they already were.
Yeah.
We already are making those deals because we only have 48 elected Democrats and 2 independents, and we need Kamala Harris to literally pass anything that is budget related. Anything, we can only use reconciliation on anything the government pays for or gets taxes from. That's it. Everything else, especially social programs, the things that most activist class voters care about the most, that's where we need way more than that. We need and we need to put the fear of social justice, as it were, in the Republican Party, not in the Democratic Party. It already exists there. The only people who don't fear it are in purple-leaning red districts like Sinema and Manchin. Everybody else is on board, and none of the Republicans are, even if they agree with the issue. That's the fascinating part, is that Republicans that may...
Like an Obama thing.
Right, yeah.
Because it's a Democratic idea, they can't agree with it.
Right. And in many ways, it was what drove, Trump to get rid of a lot of functioning programs that were actually very popular, simply because they had his name on it. I mean, again, we dealt with this, with Kentucky Connect, which is the Obamacare ACA program in Kentucky that nobody would sign up for until they named it Kentucky Connect. Essentially, the idea was they had to make them think that this was a program from their state, not Obamacare. And there were so many people that would sign up for this stuff and go, well, this is way better than that Obamacare stuff. And you're like, and my mom, who's a nurse, was helping with those signups at state fairs and stuff. And she, and her friend was like, well, it actually is. And my mom would literally go, don't tell them, because they'll not do it simply just to, they'll cut off their nose to spite their face, and this might save their life. So, Fred Gutenberg, who we adore, tweeted this morning, message to my Democratic friends. After today, stop complaining about Manchin and start talking about Val Demings, Tim Ryan, John Fetterman, Sherry Beasley, and the other Mandela, and hold every Democratic seat, such as Reverend Warnock and Captain Mark Kelly. We fixed this with our vote. And he's absolutely right. The irony that people complain about how much power Joe Manchin has, but the biggest power he has is his use as a cudgel by, what would effectively be the fringe Democratic activist class to diminish the vote for other people who are actually on board with all these things. Because Manchin's not up for re-election. Neither is Sinema. This is, I'm pretty sure. I don't think she's up. Anyways, neither one of them are up for election or are worried about this. The fear of these kind of, future. 1 second. I'm going to make sure I can see Phil when he comes on.
Okay.
The fear that these people talk about putting in Democrats. We got to hold Nancy Pelosi's feet to the fire. We got to hold Joe Biden to his feet to the fire. We got to hold. Okay. First of all, that solves nothing. They're genuinely on board with these things. They're just trying to find a way to actually get them passed. And they just don't share your utopian optimism that you could pass them all at once. Because if you could, you would have a long time ago. If these things were that kind of popular, they would already be law. There's a reason why the average voter waffles back and forth on even stuff that they, in a poll, will say they want. It's because they may believe in the thing in the abstract, but when they see details of it, either misspoken of or overhyped, that drives them away from it. And then when it gets...
They'd rather run on spite.
That's right. And so, ultimately, Manchin is actually, is basically taking fire that is better aimed at Republicans. And he would be less of a factor if we didn't have 48 Democrats.
Yeah.
If we had 52, 55, then, which we absolutely can. At one point we had 58. 57, because we still had the two independents that caucused with us. Imagine what we could get done if we managed to keep that majority just 2 cycles in a row. I'm not asking for people to vote the way I tell them to every single time. Just 2 in a row. Just show up. We'll be back.